Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jeff. Today, I want to talk about technical software engineering phone screens a little bit, aka the algorithm questions, the live coding questions that we all have to go through before we land a job offer. And I want to talk specifically about the fear of that rejection and the difficulties of getting through on those interviews. Like many of you, right? I've experienced my fair share of absolutely bombing tons of them, probably in the hundreds at this point throughout my career. And at the very end, I've gotten probably about five offers in my lifetime, in comparison to probably the hundreds that I've bombed and not even made it through the mid round. This process for me, right? Like it's like when I remember when I did my research and even looking online, it's like it's all about just acing and getting through the algorithm questions and learning the topics. Although those are incredibly like useful information, and a lot of that is true. You have to be proficient. There was a whole nother variable that I personally feel I had to overcome before I was able to consistently at least get a ratio where I could pass through and get through on and get a job offer. And that's the that's the variable of just understanding the process for what it is, overcoming my own confidence, and then overcoming the fear and just being able to perform in those interviews as I would like to, first and foremost, by getting out of my own way, which I feel like I personally got in my own way quite a bit due to my lack of confidence in those beginning days, and how difficult it is, as this is kind of a process that's many times it's like feedbackless. And the ones that really threw me a curveball was the ones that, you did poorly and you still got through, and then you did really good on one and then you didn't get through. It's just the inconsistency of it really drove up the level of anxiousness that I had before I went through on any of the interviews. And I just want to talk about that a little bit, and also be able to talk about some of the things that really helped me overcome a lot of that fear going into it today. I think one thing that helped a lot was, now that I've been in the industry for quite some time, is just actually being the person that is doing the interviewing, seeing how the companies try to frame it, meeting other interviewers, that kind of thing, and just seeing it for what it is. I can actually slow down and recognize and decide which job I want to get. I think that after that, I've been really able to analyze the process more. And although it really does still suck when, for example, if I ever bomb an interview or not get through on a job that I really wanted, it still, of course, is a huge bummer. But it's not going to impact me in a way that it's going to impact like my next interview performance, which at one point I can't even urge how badly it impacted me moving forward. And I wish I could like show you the time periods where I was like, I bombed like five in a row, and it was just like I was honestly at a point where I was scared to click on that Zoom link to get into that next interview, just because I've had such a terrible streak of not doing well, and my confidence level itself was just incredibly low. And so just wanted to talk about some of the things that helped me overcome that fear, and I hope this helps out a little bit. And yeah, just let me know what you think. Okay, so the number one thing for sure is the recognition that a lot of folks out there, right? It's like in a perfect world, in a perfectly chambered like lab environment, right? It would be like the person that does the question well, answers it well, communicates well, of course gets passed on to the next cycle, or gets that job offer. But in the real world, that is just absolutely not the case in any sort of way. I can't urge this enough, but a bad fit between two people is just going to be a bad fit. It doesn't matter if you have two of the best programmers in the world that can solve any single LeetCode problem or whatever it may be that they're asking, any sort of like, expert domain in the problem set. If they can't communicate to each other on how, if they don't have a similar communication style or can accept each other's communication style, it's just not going to be a pass. And I think this is human nature. It's just human nature just to be able to find folks that you want to work with. One great kind of thing that I talk about here that I think validates this from myself is how many interview processes are hard. Everybody makes it seem like they're looking for the best team in the world, but how many times, asking the veteran programmers, right? How many times have you joined a team and their code base is like, their code bases, their ideas. Everybody on the team is an all-star player. Their code base is an all-star code base with perfect, like with a great, like perfect, habits, that kind of thing. And I think that's rare to none. And that exactly explains the process. The process of a lot of these interviews, as much as us programmers don't want to admit it, it's not always about who's the best programmer, right? It's more about who's the best programmer in regards to the personality types, the fit for that team. And that doesn't always necessarily mean that that team is looking for the best. They might just be looking at, like, the best is just incredibly subjective throughout the industry. And I can't urge that enough. And how many times I haven't gotten through interviews. I can't urge that. How many times folks haven't gotten through on interviews simply based on one of these, based on this reason of, like, a bad fit is just a bad fit, simply as that, no matter what ends up happening during the interview process and that question in that hour. Okay, so the next thing is you got to recognize that there is so many more variables in doing the job when you're interviewing, right? The best case scenario is that you're on the right track. And what I mean by that is, like, you're on the track where they're early on in their process. They haven't brought anybody on site yet. They aren't projected to make any offers, and you're in the runs to be able to acquire a job, get a job offer. They're ready. The team is ready to make a job offer, that kind of thing. And they are actively seeking, and you are in the top, 3 or 4 or 5 folks that they want to bring on site and close out these rounds to make a job offer. But again, in the real world, those variables just don't add up. That's like that. I can't explain to you how many times I've seen job recs change. They're interviewing folks because they're afraid or they're fearful that someone that they have in the books doesn't, or the folks that they have interviewed books aren't going to accept a job offer, for example, and they're interviewing for backup plans, that kind of thing. Or if negotiations aren't going well, and they open up a couple more recs to get some more folks in the pipeline. A lot of the times when you're just out there interviewing, you're just kind of hoping that you're in the correct track, and more times than you would expect, you actually aren't, and you could potentially just be one of the alternative variables where getting that job or getting past to the next round is just low in general based on the outside variables. And I think that's a difficult one because, you get that rejection. And a lot of the times that rejection doesn't necessarily mean you didn't pass the interview. It could potentially just mean that that job rec has now closed. They found the person they need, or just in that circumstance, right? It's like somebody else just outperformed you, or they like somebody else, not necessarily because they were, but their circumstances fit you description more. Things like that. Another example I have here is, like, pay is a really big one that folks don't want to factor in. If someone potentially does worse than you, but they're willing to take 2/3 of the pay that you're asking for, those factors also follow into the probability of passing on. So it's not always as simple as just passing the interview and getting through. There are many variables involved. This next one I have here is maybe a little bit subjective, but I personally think that there is a built-in failure rate into doing this interview process. I've interviewed many times and done a lot of, I work at I would consider it like one of those traditional, high tier tech companies right now. And I've also interviewed with pretty much everyone across the board, anyone, the Googles, the Metas, that kind of thing, Amazons multiple times. And one consistent thing that I've heard from recruiting is how most folks that land those jobs actually don't get through on their first try. And so I think a lot of times, right, what we don't think about using Google, for example, is that the average rate of folks getting in on their first try is actually kind of slim. There's a way more of a higher probability that folks get in on their second attempt or their third attempt of doing the interviews at the company. And so now you scale that out. That's the industry standard, right? You scale that out to random startup that doesn't necessarily have the backing or the foundation, or missing a lot of the concepts of why those big companies do their interview process as they do and only take the questioning aspect of that interview process into their own interview funnel. It's like adding in those error rates. It's almost given that the failure rate there's almost a built-in failure rate. And I think a lot of companies actually understand that. And so failing at a job interview, failing a technical interview and not getting through does not necessarily mean you'll never ever be able to work at that company again. And it's almost a built-in factor that they kind of expect folks to not be able to get it the first time, but that's okay, and they'll give you more opportunities down the line. I can't express how many times I've personally interviewed so many times at the same companies over and over again, and I think that's something that folks don't talk about much, and they do like to see improvement as well. Whereas most folks just think that, if you don't get in the first time, you're never going to get in. I just simply don't think that's necessarily the case, at least from my own personal experience. Okay, so the next thing that I have here that really helps me overcome this fear is just being able to stick to my timeline, my strategy, what I value in a company. This all sounds kind of cheesy, but I think this is incredibly important looking back because when you're doing these interviews, it's not only that you're the one that's being tested, right? It's also the other way around, where you're the person that's making sure that these teammates that you're talking to are people that you personally want to work with. And so if you are confident that your question is right, or you're asking the right questions and they're not reciprocating correctly, that to me now at this point is a red flag on that team itself. And so I feel like, of course, early on, that's a very difficult thing if you're just looking for a job. But, as I've gotten more experience, I definitely value those things. And I'm not going to let my beliefs and what I'm looking for in a team get shifted because the person disagrees with how I'm going about this question. If I genuinely don't think that the way they're answering my questions fluidly or up to my standard that I'm looking for my next team. And that's not to say that they're better or worse, but I think that, again, this comes back to just being able to find folks you want to work with. And I think in these interview settings, it's just so simple, so easy to just give them all the power and forget that this is also an opportunity for you to see if you're a good fit with that teammate that you're potentially interviewing with, or see what the company values in terms of their interviewing strategies, that kind of thing, which is a large reflection back on how they work day in and day out. All right, I hope that was helpful. Man, again, right? I wish I thought about this a little bit differently early on. I can't tell you how many times I've been just the biggest blocker for myself because I wasn't able to recognize this. Understand that a lot of these things, right? Sticking to your plan, just having the confidence that you're doing the right things, that you're going about learning the questions, getting better at interviewing day in and day out, practicing, and just sticking through your strategy and recognize that you are getting better is way more important than trying to worry about the alternative factors on, why you didn't get through or what went wrong. I think that there are moments to think about that. Give it a day, give it an hour to reflect back on that process. But the worst thing you can do is let that carry on to your next interview and let that impact the next one. Every single one of your interviews that you take are isolated incidents. The person from your last interview, the last company, doesn't know who you're the person that you're interviewing with today doesn't know that, how you did on the last one. So everyone is a clean slate and clean opportunity. And I think that was one of my biggest mistakes, was continuing to let those things carry on and developing a lack of confidence. I hope that was helpful, and I hope that made sense. If not, or if you have anything specifically about any of those topics, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Later.